No one should ever have to follow Sir Ken. I think there are constitutional protections I have that may have been violated just now. I'm a full-time faculty member here at BYU, and if I'm an innovator, I'm a part-time one. I do it on the side because I love the teaching and the research too much to walk away from my university gig. But I hope to share some things with you about the way that I think about innovation and convince you that if I can do it on the side, that you certainly can too. That's my goal. Newton is famous for saying that he got a head start on the work that he did by building on the work of other people that came before him. And I'm sure that that's true. But I think that, to borrow some language from Sir Ken, I think there's a little linearity in that narrative that might not really be true. We don't just build forward in a single line of work frequently intellectually. When you think about words used to describe the way that culture is produced today, about remix and about mashup, I think intellectual advancement and innovation happens the same way. That we're often putting things that have never been put together, and that's where innovations are coming from. I think about it sort of like the dating game for ideas. You're taking these two ideas that are strangers to each other, that have never interacted before, and introducing them and seeing what happens, seeing if they hit it off. Take H.B. Reese, for example. He wasn't working on making better chocolate. He wasn't working on making better peanut butter. But he put these two things together, these two very different things, and created something I think we all agree is awesome. Right? This is the model of innovation I want to talk about. So Eric Raymond, who's quite a character, I'll talk about him a little bit more in a moment, gave this quote, that to solve an interesting problem, you have to start by finding a problem that's interesting to you. And I think this passion that's been talked about over and over again today is really critical and is really key. For me as an individual, I'm interested in education, particularly access to educational opportunity for people who haven't had it or have trouble getting to it in the past. So let me tell 3 stories about things that I've been involved in to try to surface this idea of bringing different ideas together. In 1997, I was at Marshall University in my hometown in West Virginia working as a webmaster. And in the afternoon, one afternoon, I was working on a JavaScript calculator, a calculator in a web page. This was cutting edge at the time. And it occurred to me that this calculator is different from the calculators that we had at the elementary school at Davis Creek, where I attended. It wasn't like a calculator that you had to sit and wait your turn for somebody to pass it around to you. But this calculator was magic in some special way. Once this calculator was made digital and was put online, that 1 million people could use this calculator at the same time. The same way that while at the breakfast table you might wait for your spouse to finish the newspaper to hand it to you so that you can read it, 1 million people can read CNN.com at the same time. We don't have to compete for access to these resources when they're digital. And I thought this is very interesting. I got very excited about it. And I thought if we could add this magic to educational materials, then people could use them and download them and copy them and change them, and there'd be no cost at all. Well, technically, that's true, but there are small legal problems with downloading and changing and sharing and copying things that you don't have permission to use. Just a few months later, in the winter of 1998, Eric Raymond, who I showed a moment ago, and some other folks got together and coined this term open source. And open source, as you may know, is a way of licensing software. And the thing that is brilliant about it is it takes copyright and kind of does a judo throw, using the strength of copyright against itself, to say, I'm going to create a license that absolutely guarantees everyone can share this for free with anyone else. As opposed to, we think about the traditional role of copyright being to restrict access and make sure you have to pay before you're allowed to use something. So I thought, boy, if we put this chocolate in this peanut butter, something really tasty would happen. What if we took this idea of this kind of open source copyright license and we put it together with this magic digital educational material? Let's call that open content. And so in 1998, I thought, let's call this thing open content. And I started trying to evangelize the idea and getting people thinking that we should do this. So the first activity then is to create some licenses that are easy for people to take and apply to their essays or to their music or to their video. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and the license that I created, which many people used, it was probably a terrible mistake on their part. If any of that had ever gone to court, it probably would all have been overturned. But later in 2001, a group of real lawyers came along and picked up that framework and started what's called Creative Commons. and made real licenses out of these that people could really pick up and use. And in 2002, UNESCO said, there's a lot of power in this idea. We need a term that we can get that everyone can gather around so that there's a brand and we can point to it and try to create an international movement. We'll call it Open Educational Resources. So you may have seen this Creative Commons logo around the internet. It pops up here and there. If you've been to the MIT OpenCourseware site, you've seen the Creative Commons logo. Or if you've looked at the bottom of this site called Wikipedia, you've seen the Creative Commons logo. This is the legal infrastructure that enables free sharing of educational materials on a huge scale. In fact, as of the end of 2009, the estimates through some research with the help of Google showed that there were about 350 million items on the internet that used one of these Creative Commons licenses, ensuring that they were free for anyone to download, copy, change, and share with their friends. So I think this was some success. I started this work when I was a student at BYU. Actually, not very far from here, there's a tree that I was running the lawnmower under that I hit my head on when I said to myself, we should do this open source thing with this content. It would be really cool. So I graduated from BYU and I went up to Utah State to work. And a few years later, I was assigning textbooks to students and they were complaining. I don't know if there are any students in the room who have ill feelings toward textbooks. Students have some bad feelings about them, it turns out. No, don't applaud. You have ill feelings toward textbook. And that's the wrong response. You should boo or hiss. Thank you. So I was minding my own business one day when I was contacted by these two really interesting guys, Jeff Shellstad and Eric Frank, who had just left Pearson, which is a major textbook publishing company. And they said, we hear all these complaints about textbooks, that there are all these things wrong with textbooks. People claim that they might be too expensive. They talk about how the market is broken, like a faculty member picks the book, but the student has to pay for it. Doesn't the person who pays normally choose the product that they're going to buy? It might also be too expensive. And that there are no options. The faculty member picks one, and essentially you either buy it or you don't. And also, there's a rumor that they're too expensive. So they said, we think this Creative Commons thing might work for textbook. We think something really cool could happen here. And we could fix a lot of what's broken with textbooks if we start to put these things together. And as we talked about the different ideas and the different things that we could try and this problem of no options, one of the things we kept coming back to is this idea of mass customization. If you've bought a computer recently and you've bought it online, you've seen a site like this where you say, well, I want this much memory in my computer, I want this much hard drive, I want the screen to be this size. You don't just pick something up off the shelf and take it home. You have an expectation that when you buy a car, you get to choose the color of the outside and the fabric and the interior. You want it to be customized. Well, so he said, well, let's, there's more than one chocolate and one peanut butter here, but if we mix all these things together, this idea of OER and mass customization and what Jeff and Eric know about textbooks, having worked inside Pearson, we could make this thing called open textbooks. So I became the Chief Openness Officer, which is the coolest title in the world, of Flat World Knowledge, which is a commercial textbook publishing company that publishes all of their textbooks under a Creative Commons license, so they're completely free for you to copy or download or give away to anyone, change any way that you'd like to. But if reading online isn't your thing, there are options. If you want to download a PDF, you can do that, but you pay some money to do that. If you want the audio book, you can buy the audio book. If you want paperback, black and white, you can buy that. If you want hardback, full color, you can buy that. If you want it on your Kindle or your iPad, you can buy that. But you always have the option to just read it for free online. So we're in private beta 2 years ago and really open to public use this last year. And you can see here that we've reached this interesting threshold where so far we estimate we've saved students about $15 million, and our last round of investment funding was about $15 million. So there's something interesting happening there. I think this is success. So that's educational content, educational materials, but what about teaching, as Sir Ken was talking about? There's surely some room left to do some innovation in there. So a number of years ago, this fellow down on the right, Ben Bloom and his colleagues, did some work where they compared a variety of teaching models with each other. And of course, they looked at traditional classroom teaching, but they also looked at a model where one kid, or maybe two kids, got tutored all day long, full time. And they said, what would the difference in outcome be if we tutored a kid one-on-one all day long versus putting him in a classroom of 30 students? And here's the difference. That red line down the center there is showing you, the middle of the distribution of kids who are tutored. The average kid that was tutored outperformed 98% of kids in the classroom. This is at multiple grade levels and in multiple subject areas. Now, what this says to me is that our kids are so much more capable. They're capable of doing so much more than we're getting out of them. We're really failing them in this way. However, if you've been in class recently, we can barely afford to put one teacher in front of 100 kids or one teacher in front of 150 kids, let alone hire a full-time tutor for every kid. So this must not be possible for us to do, the conventional thinking would say. Well, Amazon.com has millions of customers, and yet they figure out ways to make personalized recommendations to me. Netflix has millions of customers, and yet they figure out a way to make personalized recommendations to me. Even the grocer down the street, right? When I go through and I swipe my little discount card, they print off receipts with coupons that are customized for me. So if the grocer can do it, surely to goodness we can do it in education, right? How does this personalization work? Well, it requires lots of data, lots and lots. And it turns out that technology makes data really efficient and cheap to gather and to analyze and to look at. Amazon is online, Netflix is online, that whole checkout process at the checkout stand is digitized. So I thought, well, there are online classes. We have a great online program here at BYU. It enrolls like 150,000 people a year. So I know there's online schools, but I don't think they're doing anything like Amazon is doing. And I know nobody's doing full-time tutoring like Bloom was saying we ought to do. So what if we took these three ideas and we put them together in a way where instead of tutoring everybody all the time, we took this kind of mass personalization approach to only tutor kids who needed tutoring when they needed tutoring about the thing they needed tutored about. Instead of trying to tutor them all day long, maybe just the same teacher-to-student ratio could actually work. And every kid could get one-on-one tutoring when they needed it and the thing that they needed help about. So a few years ago, I founded this charter school called the Open High School of Utah, which is interesting in a couple of ways, I think. One, because it's committed itself in its charter documents to only use open educational resources. We will not adopt curriculum that we don't have the right to change when we find a problem that we need to change. We don't want something that somebody else has the rights to. We want things that we can improve so that it can develop in this kind of organic way that you just heard about. The same curriculum that works well in one location won't work well in another, not exactly or not quite the way you want it to. And your teachers need to be empowered to go right into the curriculum and make the changes that they can see need to be made. So it's interesting in that way, but it's also interesting in that it really applies this idea of strategic tutoring. So that we do have teachers, but the teachers don't stand up and teach the same biology lecture 6 times during a day. All that kind of lecture stuff is put online, and the students go through and they watch the videos and they do the activities and play with the simulations. But there's data that comes out of that system because everything a student does, they click on something. Everything that they interact with generates data that can be logged and analyzed and presented to a teacher in the dashboard. So that when a teacher wakes up in the morning, a teacher can say, who needs my help today? And who needs it the most? Today, I'm going to reach out to Bill because I can see Bill's struggling with this issue, and I'm either going to get on the phone, I'm going to get on Skype, I'm going to get on a chat or something, and I'm going to spend 10 or 15 or 20 minutes one-on-one with this one kid until he kind of gets it and then is able to go on. And then I'll go to the next person on my list, and I'll tutor all the people who need tutored. But you know, Jessamine probably doesn't need tutored today. She might in a couple days, but today she's great, so I'm going to let her keep going at her own pace, just working as fast as she can. And when she needs help, hopefully before she realizes she needs help, I'll be able to figure it out, and I can reach out to her and give her the tutoring, the one-on-one help that she needs to really help her develop and move along. Now, we haven't been at this very long. We're in our second year right now. We only have 250 students, but if you've ever been involved in a startup enterprise, you know that those first years are rocky. And even in our first year, our students did better than the state average on the standardized exams. And I think as we work the kinks out organizationally and some other things, that some very interesting things will happen here. And also, just as of 2 weeks ago, we're in the first set of conversations and have the first set of legislation running to take this model and move it to another state here in the US. So I hope as you look around and you expose yourself to these interesting ideas, you'll be mixing them together in your head and looking for opportunities having the right attitude of humility and wanting to be useful so that these opportunities can find you and you can do great things for other people. We can all do it. If I can do it, you can certainly do it, and I hope that you will. Thank you.